Hello makers and 3D printer enthusiasts. Today we're going to do part 2 of building the SecKit Go 3D printer. Now before we get started on this section, in this part of the video build we are going to be fitting our linear rails. Now I wanted to have a little chat with you about those before we got into the build. Originally this kit you could order it with original high wind rails and bearings like these, or you could order it with some Chinese copies. Now the owner of the company, Ernest, got hold of me and said he was stopping providing the Chinese copies because not many people were ordering them in their kits, and also he was a little bit concerned about the quality of the bearings he was sending out. So now he's only selling the original high wind rails and bearings. So I've just thought I'd bring that up, because what I had to do was I altered my order with him so he would send me the original high wind ones, because originally I'd asked for the Chinese copies because I'm a cheapskate and want to save a few quid. Now the important thing with these rails and bearings is the setup of them. When you get them you must clean them and you must re-oil them before you put them into your kit. Now although I can go through this with you, there is somebody out there that is far better at this than me. There is a guy called Kenis on YouTube, and he's got a couple of videos out talking about cheap Chinese rails and the high wind expensive rails, the differences, how to clean them, how to oil them, the best ways to do it. His video is very informative. He goes into a lot of detail about the differences. As you can see, I've got him playing down here, down there we go. So that's one of his 2 videos. I'll put a link in the description. He explains about cleaning them and oiling them up. There are several different ways of doing it, using different materials. I personally am using WD-40 to clean off the oil that comes on the bearings when they come. Then I'm using just some compressed air from Poundland just to blow the oil off while you wait for it to dry, and then I am oiling it up with good old 3-in-1. As I say, if you look at his videos, he goes into a great more detail. He splits them down, shows you everything that can be going on in them, finds some little bits of grit in some of the cheap Chinese ones once he's done a clean out. But his explanation is far better than mine, so links in the description to his videos. The one thing I will say is, apart from this bearing, all the other bearings in a kit come in pairs. Now what I suggest you do is, as just a little addendum, when you fit these bearings onto these rails, they come with in there you see there's a little plastic guide, so when you're sliding them on you push them on like that, so it slides from the plastic onto the metal. I'll show me actually doing that a little bit later on, but what I suggest you do, if they come in pairs, I would suggest that you actually try them both on both rails just to find out which ones work better, because you may find that some work better than others. By that I mean the smoothness of them as you put them on. Just try to match them. Okay, it's important to try and match the quality. He talks about, as you can see here, about the smoothness of the rails, the smoothness of the bearings. These are the Chinese copies he's talking about in this video. You don't need to worry about these are the ones you'll be getting in your kit. But it's important to check each bearing with each rail, so that way you'll find out which ones run smoothest. It's just pairing them up basically, and it's just quite an important thing to do. The other thing I suggest you do, which is again entirely up to you, but it's what I do, I put cable ties in the end of the rails. So I'll put this cable tie on, I'll slide the bearing on, and then I'll put a cable tie on the other end. This means while you're cleaning and oiling, your bearing can't fall off the end, because if your bearing falls off the end you might get some of the little ball bearings falling out. It becomes an issue. So that's all I do. I just put a cable tie at each end, so while I'm cleaning and oiling the bearings up they can't go anywhere. Right, that's enough about that. Let's get cracked on into the video. So let's get right into it and start building the Y plane. Now the first thing you must do is make a decision on the positioning of your linear rails. You can either have them towards the front of the printer or more towards the back of the printer. I asked on the Facebook group and got several replies. Some people saying they've gone with position A, other people with position B, and their various reasons for doing so. I've decided to go with position A, which brings the rails to the front of the printer. This means I have more room at the back should I want to do or change anything in the future. So once we've decided that, you then need to build your little stoppers, which is your bolt, your nut, which goes through the Y plate, and your nut on the bottom, and it sits, as you can see, like that. I've already done that section, so let's move straight on to fitting the linear rails. So next we must loosely fit the linear rails. So you need to pick your 360mm rails with your bearings already fitted, oiled, cleaned, and everything else that you need to do beforehand. Then you need the M3x10 bolts, which come labelled like so, and your M3 nuts, which is in that packet there. So the rails take 5 bolts per side, so we'll drop those through and then loosely tighten the nuts below. Try not to drop too many of your nuts on the floor. As you can see, I'm tightening those up and then just backing them off slightly so there is play in the rail, as when you've got them both set up you'll need to make sure they're entirely perpendicular to each other before tightening the nuts all the way home. But at this stage what you can do is you can now set the height of your end stops by bringing your rail to the end like so, and then we can loosen that nut off slightly so it raises that top piece up so it lines up perfectly with the bearing on the rail, and then they can be tightened home. So once we've done this side, I'll do exactly the same on that side, and then we'll come back. So for each pulley you'll need one idler with the 22th gear. You'll find those in that bag there. You need an M5x45 bolt, labelled as such. You need 6 or 4 M5 nuts, depending on which side you're doing. They come in that bag there. So if you're doing this side you need 4, if you're doing this side you need 6. That's where the 2 extra nuts go. We'll sort that in a moment. We need the nylon washers. Now some people have had difficulty finding the nylon washers in the pack. In my pack they come in that bag that says M7. No, it doesn't. It says 7x3x20, and it's got some kind of standoffs in it, and as you can see there at the bottom, there are your nylon washers. So that's where they were in my kit. And then you need your 5x10x1 washers. So following the instructions to do this side, you take the bolt, put on the pulley, fit your nylon washer, it says interlock the 2 bolts tightly at a position as near the top as possible, but keep the idler rotating freely. So we spin that bolt up, and make sure that idler can rotate freely. Which it can do. So we'll now bring in the second bolt, and we'll tighten that against the first one. just creating a lock. I have a spanner for hand that fits. We can snick that up. That's maybe a little bit tight. We'll just back that off slightly. There we go, we've got free movement there. And then we'll tighten that nut to it. Probably going to need to use 2 spanners. I'll find another spanner. We're going to nip those 2 tight to each other. Make sure we still have free movement on that. It's just a little on the tight side, so we're just going to take it back a touch, nip it up again. Nice amount of free movement on there. Those 2 nuts are nice and tight against each other. We'll just snick them. Done like that. Then this needs to go through this hole here, you see. So we need a nut and a washer through the hole like so, and then a nut, a washer and a nut on the bottom. We'll just get those on something like. We're not going to tighten these fully at the moment, as we will need to alter those to get the height of the pulley correct. So we'll just get them into situ for now, like so, and then we'll move on to this one with the 2 extra bolts. So for this side, pulley, then this is where the difference is. We now have 3 nuts on, as you can see in the diagram. So 1, 2, 3, then a washer, and then that's going to go through this hole this side like this. Making sure we have enough thread through the bottom, like so, so we can put the last washer and nut on the bottom. Remember, don't tighten these at the moment too much, because we will need to alter the height of the pulley so it is the correct height for the belt setup. So, washer on. You do need 3 pairs of hands to do this. Get the nut in your fingers. We'll just spin that on like so. So there we go, that's those 2 front pulleys set up. We'll now move on to do the rear pulleys, and for that you need 2 idlers without the gears. This has 1 bolt M5x40, 3 nuts of M5, 1 T-nut of M5, 1 nylon washer and 2 washers M5x by 10 by 1. So we'll dig those out and we'll get on with that. So we need 2 of the pulleys without teeth. We need an M5 by 40 bolt from this pack. We need an M5 T-nut from this pack. And then we have the M5 nuts, washers and nylon washers as we used before. So just following the diagram here. Start at the top. So I have bolt, idler, then we want a normal washer, then we want the second idler, then we want the nylon washer, then we want 2 nuts, we're doing the interlocking trick here again. Get them tight but make sure that the pulleys can spin freely. Maybe just a little tight, so we'll just loosen that off slightly. Second nut on. So, out with your 2 spanners. That one on there. That one on there. And tighten one against the other. So they're nice and tight, but the pulleys are free to move. You can of course alter this tension later if you find that you've maybe got them a little tight or a little loose. But that seems to work okay for me. So then we have another nut. And a washer. And then onto the bottom of here we need a T-nut. This is going to go through this hole here. Now as you can see we have a slight issue here. They want us to put the pulley into this hole here with the T-nut into the rail, but the issue is that we already have a bolt and T-nut here. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to unscrew this bolt, slide the T-nut out of the way, drop the M5 T-nut in, push it along the track until it lines up with this hole, and then we can screw it into place. I'm going to use a zip tie in through that hole there to push that T-nut clear. Then we will get our M5 T-nut, push it in, slide that back into the hole until it lines up like so, and then take our pulley assembly from the top like so. Wait till we feel it bite. It's just moved ever so slightly. This may be a little fiddly to get lined up, but a little bit of perseverance get that in like that, and that's now locked in place. That T-nut's now in, so then we can slide this T-nut back to line up with that hole and refit that bolt into there. So now we move on to the XY stepper with belt tensioner. For the left stepper, we need the aluminium stepper motor mount, the 4 nylon tubes, the M3 by 7 by 24, the 4 bolts M3 by 32, and a T16 gear with a 5mm bore, which is one of those smaller ones there. And it's a very simple build. Make sure that you have the socket there, the connection for your stepper motor to that side as it is orientated in the diagram. Fit your pulley, taking note the direction, so it needs to be on like that, so your teeth cog is to the top and your Allen bolt is to the bottom. Line up the flat point on the shaft, on the stepper motor shaft, with one of the Allen key bolts, and then loosely tighten that up. You don't need to tighten it up too much because you will be moving that to make sure you get your line of the belt perfectly straight, so that will be moving. With this plate, make sure that this centre hole here is to the back like that, because when it's sat on top it will then be used for your belt tensioning, so make sure that hole is to the back, and it's just a simple matter of bolt in, sleeve in, and then screw it into place. So I'll do all 4 of those and we'll come back and have a quick look. So now you should have a stepper motor that looks something like that, with your hole, like I say, to the rear for tensioning. And now we shall move over and do the right side. So the right side, as you can see, is very similar to the left side, apart from we have the 14mm tube and the 20mm tube. So those two like that. Again, make sure you get this hole to the rear, as that will be used for your tensioning later. Make sure you get the orientation of this correctly. It's slightly counterintuitive if you've built stepper motors before. Generally the orientation is the other way, but that is the correct orientation. Make sure you line a grub screw up with a flat spot on the stepper motor. That way you know it gets a good grip. And then just build as per the instructions. So you'll have that on. You have your bolt through, your plate, your long nylon tube, your short nylon tube, and then into the stepper motor housing, like so. Repeat for the other 3 and we'll come back and take a quick look. So when finished, you should have a stepper motor that looks something like that, with your plug orientated this direction and your hole to the rear, like so. So now we're looking from the rear of the printer. This is the left hand side stepper motor, and as you can see, it sits into the 4 grooves like that. Then you take your bolt and your washer, that's your M4 by 16 bolt and your M4 washer. Put it up through the bottom, through the hole in the mounting plate. Then you place your second washer, like so, and then your nut onto the top without dropping the washer. So what we're doing here is just putting it on loosely. Again, this would be far easier if I wasn't thinking about cameras and lighting and everything else that goes with it. There we go, we'll get that loosely tightened up like so. So as you can see, that then affords us movement there, which is how you alter your belt tension, and then you will just tighten it up fully once you've got your tension where you want it. So we'll just repeat the same for the right hand side and then we'll move on. And now we move on to the X plane. For the XY joiner pulley set, for the short pulley set, we need one M4 by 25 bolt, one M4 nut, one M4 by 9 by 0.8 washer, and two of these F64 double Z bearings, which come in this little case like that. So two of those. And the assembly is very straightforward, as you can see. Bolt from the top, put the bearing on like so, with the raised portion to the top, then put the other bearing on the opposite way, so the raised portion is to the bottom, so that gives you the depth of your belt there. Then we need to put this through the X plate with the washer on next, and then these go through into the X plate, as you will see. So we should make these up first. We need two of this size and then two of the larger size, which are here, which is the same setup but with some nuts in between and a slightly longer bolt. We want the M4 by 25, so we'll build one of those and then we will show where they go. So now, as you can see, we have the two short pulley sets made and the two long pulley sets made, with those three extra bolts in just to raise the pulley up, and then they are mounted onto the XY joiner. As you can see, you've got a high one and a low one and a low one and a high one, so they're opposite angles to each other. So we shall fit a low one in there, a high one in there, and then when we come to this end we will fit a low one in there and a high one in there, so they are opposites to each other. So you've got high, low, high, low. So it's just a matter of putting the nuts on the bottom of those and giving them a tighten. So they are, you can see now, high pulley, low pulley, high pulley, low pulley, so they're diagonally the same height. Make sure that all your pulleys are free running, like so, and all the nuts are tight. Should look like that on the underneath, and we'll move on to the next step. So with that done, we now move on to the fitting of the X linear rail. So with the linear rail, with this longer block, the MGM 9H, and its rail, this is going to fit underneath here, so this way up like so. You're also going to need your printed X minimum bumper. You're going to need 7 M3 by 10 bolts and 7 nuts. Basically making sure that you've got the tall pulley here and the short pulley here. This bumper will sit on the bottom and we'll just clip over like so. So looking from the top it looks like that, and then your rail, your linear rail, will sit on here like that, and you will install your 7 bolts and nuts along the length. Just by pushing the bolt head through like that, and then fixing the nut from the other side. Be careful that you do not lose this bearing off the end of here. They suggest using a cable tie to hold it in place So if you're going to do that, you need to find a point at which there are no screw holes here, and then cable tie around there, which is just a simple matter of doing that. That will hold the bearing in position without it fouling any of the screw points. So we'll just carefully, don't put too much tension on it, you don't want to bend anything, but that's just enough to hold it in place there, clear of those two holes, while we put the bolts and nuts into place. So once that's done, we'll come back. So now you should have something that looks a little like this. High pulley, low pulley, your bump stop, and then your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bolts holding your linear rail in place underneath, and then you should have high pulley and low pulley at this end. Keep this cable tie on just for now, just so we don't slide off the end, and we'll move on to the next step. So for this next stage you need 8 of these M3x8 bolts, making sure that your side linear rails are still loose. You want to place the axis across the top, the X plate, like so. You want to line the holes up and just put one in, making sure your bump stop is to the left hand side, as that where your minimum point is. And we want to just, so they bite, get these 8 bolts into the 8 holes, and then we're going to lower this bar right down to here, and we're going to tighten up these ever so slightly, and then we're going to slide it all the way to the top and then tighten up these. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that these rails are perfectly positioned, perpendicular to each other and perfectly square, with no binding whatsoever coming up and down, and then we know that we've got everything absolutely right. So I'll get these 8 bolts in, I'll slide down to the bottom, and then we'll come back and take a closer look. So with those 8 bolts now tightened, we can now take this rail and slide it down to the front and slide it up to the back, bring it right to the front, and then these 2 closest bolts here, we'll just give them a little snick up. Then we will slide the rail towards the top, just leaving it slightly short of the top. In fact, you can move it all the way up if you want, just to check that there is no binding, but then bring it back slightly so you can access the 2 bolts at the back and give those a little tighten up. And we can slide down again and just check that we're nice and smooth, and then we can come close to these 2 bolts here and just give those a little tighten up, all the time checking that you have a smooth, unhindered motion the full length of the carriage, like so. And then we'll come up and just beyond these 2 bolts here, and we'll give those a tighten up. Like so. And then again, check you have a completely unhindered, smooth action right from the top right to the bottom, and that both bump stops hit at the same time at the top and at the bottom. That way you know you've got everything completely square and perpendicular. Tighten up the 2 centre ones. That's it. That's now neatly in place, moving very smoothly. No twisting, no binding anywhere. Just a beautifully smooth linear rail motion. Now we move on to stage 8, which is setting up the Z-plane. So for the Z-plane setup you will need your MGN 12C linear blocks, your MGN 12 linear rails, which should be the only ones you have left in theory, 4 bolts of M3x8 and 4 T-nuts of M3. And it says you also need the printed assembly guide. And it says fix the linear block temporarily with a cable tie to prevent it falling out of the rail. We're not going to do that at the moment. First of all, we've got to get it set up. And basically what it's saying is it wants to butt up to there. Let's see if I can zoom that in for you. So it wants to butt up to where this extrusion meets this extrusion. Your guide is there for when you have your rail on. You sit your guide over your linear rail, which then sits over your extrusion, and then you can slide that up until it sits like so. And then you'll do the same at the bottom like that, which you can't see because I've zoomed in. But you set the same at the bottom like that. Now it doesn't state in the manual where to put the T-nuts and bolts, so I am going to put them on the topmost part there, and then we zoom right back out on the bottommost part there. So the guide across like so, which sets the rail, the linear rail, on the centre of the 20x20 extrusion, and then we'll put the bolt with the T-nut to there, and then we'll slide it up till it's flush there, and then the bolt and the T-nut in the bottom end. So that's what will fit, and then we'll come back. So with the T-nuts and bolts fitted like so, we'll drop those into the rail. We will slide them up till it's flush with here. Like that, and like I've said before, if you totally unwind the T-nut now and then wind it up, that's got you a good grip. Down to the bottom end, do the same thing, wind the T-nut all the way out and then in, and there you go, that T-nut has now positioned itself perfectly. There's your linear rail nicely set, flush with the top there. So we'll just flip over now and do the same on the other side. Just before we flip it over, this is the point at which this bearing can drop off the bottom of the rail. So you get your cable tie, put it around like that, and then just don't over tighten it, just give it enough that it's going to hold the bearing in place there, so when we turn it over it doesn't slide and drop out of the bottom, and we'll do the other side the same. So with the T-nuts and bolts fitted like so, we'll drop those into the rail. We will slide them up till it's flush with here. Like that, and like I've said before, if you totally unwind the T-nut now and then wind it up, that's got you a good grip. Down to the bottom end, do the same thing, wind the T-nut all the way out and then in, and there you go, that T-nut has now positioned itself perfectly. There's your linear rail nicely set, flush with the top there. So we'll just flip over now and do the same on the other side. So we're now going to assemble the bed supports. We have the L-shaped bed support, and this is the lead screw bracket which sits into the support like that, and then we put 3 M3x10 bolts and 3 M3 nuts. The bolts come up from the bottom through there and the nuts onto the top. So we'll do that for both sides and then we'll come back. So the two brackets now set up, with the bolts in from the bottom up through the top, so they sit like that. We will now attach them to the lead screws. So we're now going to attach the L-shaped bracket to the bearing using the 4 central holes onto the 4 holes in the bearing. Now it states on here that you are to use the M3x8 bolts and M3x6x1 washers, but it does state if the screw is too long to use more than one washer between the plate and the linear bearing so the screw tightens up. So we'll try those and see how it is and see if we need more than one. So I put a single washer in and tightened this bolt as much as I would care to, and I still have some play, so I will be putting 2 washers on the front of each bolt, then the plate, and then into the bearing. So with 2 washers and the bolt going through the plate, that is a good firm hold. So I shall do the same on the other 3 and the same on the other side, and then we'll come back. So this next section just gets a little bit complicated, so follow me slowly, check, double check and treble check before you move on. You're going to need your lead screw mount, the 20T gear with the 8mm bore, the closed loop belt, 2 M5x8 bolts and 2 T-nuts. Now this is per lead screw. Now it says lubricate the lead screw before using it. I've already done that with just a little bit of 3-in-1 oil and then wiped it off, so it's greasy to the touch but not dripping with oil. It says insert the lead screw through the lead screw nut, then the gear, then the belt and the lead screw mount. Don't tighten these bolts yet. You will see the lead screw wobble when you move the bed support up and down. Find a position where the lead screw mount, where the top of the lead screw doesn't wobble or shift. Tighten the bolts on the 20T gear and the lead screw mount. So what we're actually going to do, here is the lead screw. I'll just move that around slightly so you can see the mount. So I'm going to reposition the camera to bring you down to this level here so you can see actually what I'm about to do. So what the basic idea is, with the lead screw fitted through the brass section here, we're going to fit this to the bottom like so. We're then going to fit this bearing at the bottom with your T-nuts and bolts into the holes. That will sit into there like that, but we've also got to have the belt around here because it's a closed loop belt. That belt must go into place now. Okay, so once we've got the belt into place, we will then sit that there with those bolts just loose. We'll snick this one up slightly and we will snick the grub screw that's on the bottom of the bearing up slightly, and then we will move that up and down, and we're looking for wobble at the top. So we're looking for wobble up here. So as it runs up and down, you'll get movement there, and what we have to do, we have to fine tune the position of this so it makes the rod perfectly perpendicular all the way up, right the way up to the top, so we don't have any wobble at the top. So we'll get the belt on around here, we'll get the T-nuts and bolts into the holes on here, we will tighten these up slightly, and then we will start to move the linear bearing up and down and adjust here until we get this perfectly straight going up, and then when we know we've got that perfectly straight, we will find no wobble at the top here as we slide it up and down, and then we know we're perfectly set. So we'll just pull this back out of here, we'll fit the T-nuts to the bottom of this, drop it into the rail, line it up approximately, and then we'll start the process of removing the wobble from the lead screw. So at this point I just wanted to show you a little tip that's worked for me, may possibly work for you. I haven't yet put the belt in. This lead screw will lift out of the bearing at the bottom. He says he's just jammed it back in, but basically what I did, now you see it lifts out, basically what I did was I sat it into place like so, got my trusted digital calipers. What I actually did was I brought this bearing here right the way to the top of the screw here, and I took a measurement using my digital calipers between there and there. So I'll just pull that up. Sorry for the awfully bad camera work at this point, but it's just a little addendum. See, I've now pulled the lead screw out. I did this with the bottom bearing being ever so slightly loose. So what I did was I just wound this right to the top with that sat in, took a measurement across there. Okay, so it's the distance between the flat of the linear rail and the lead screw, and then I wound the lead screw right the way down on the bearing, so it comes right down to the bottom. Like so, and then I took the same measurement there, so the distance between the lead screw and the rail is the same there. So then I know that this lead screw is equally distant at the top and at the bottom. So when I tighten these two small grub screws back up down here and run this shaft up and down, I have no wobble at the top. So what I can do now is, because I've loosened those two grub screws off, I can now remove the shaft, put the belt in, put this pulley in, tighten everything up, and then I will show you that I have no wobble up at the top there. So now, with the grub screws all tightened up, this tightened up, you can now see, look at the top, minimal wobble on the lead screw down the whole length of the shaft. So a little bit more oil inside the brass fitting here and a tiny amount down the bottom here. That will be fine, and we'll do the same on the other side, and then we'll move on to the next step. Just a small note, after having spent several minutes attempting to get the right lead screw to run level, I noticed that the bearing in the bottom isn't seated correctly. As you can see, this side here is sat lower than this side here, so it's not pressed flat into its mount, which meant didn't matter how much I tried to alter the settings and level it, I was still getting wobble. So I'm now going to find a way to set that level, and then hopefully we can move on with the right side lead screw. So after a little bit of persuasion from a pair of needle nose pliers, I now have this bearing sitting correctly, and now I can continue with fitting the right hand side lead screw. So they have it fitted correctly and working smoothly. Let's get on to the next step. So next we're going to build the Z-belt tensioner. We're going to need one idler without the gear and a 5mm bore. We're going to need one bolt M5x40, 4 nuts of M5, one nylon washer of M5x8x1, 2 washers of M5x10x1. So with the pulley built, we have to add that to the mounting plate. which is this here, through the large hole, and then fit the washer and the nut to the bottom. As before, we don't tighten these too much yet, as we will need to adjust it for the height of the pulley. But that's basically your design for your tensioner. And then from that point, we need to prepare the NEMA stepper motor with its bracket. Now the orientation for this is going to be like so, and onto the frame like that. So we'll get the necessary hardware to build this up, and then we'll fit that with the idler pulley as instructed. At this stage we will add the feet to the bottom of the printer before mounting the bracket for the NEMA stepper motor, as once you have bolted the stepper motor to the bracket, it is nigh on impossible to fit it to the frame. So with your two M4x8 bolts and T-nuts fitted, we need to fit this bracket onto the frame here. Now as you can see, if you'd had the stepper motor fitted, it would be almost impossible to get to these two fittings here to tighten them up. So with the bracket mounted roughly central of this 2020 extrusion, so you're roughly the same at the top and the bottom, we can now fit the stepper motor with its pulley. Please note the orientation of the pulley. The teeth are at the bottom, the Allen grub screws are at the top. Doesn't matter where that is at the moment, as you'll be able to slide that up and down to get your belts correctly. We're going to feed that up underneath, bolt into place there, like that, with the 4 M3x8 bolts and the washers. It does say you may need more than one washer per bolt, but in my case one washer is sufficient for it to tighten down. So we'll tighten those up, and then we'll move on to adding the pulley. So with two other M4x8 bolts and T-nuts fitted to the tensioner pulley, we can sit that onto the frame there and give those a loose tighten, like so. So we now need to fit the tensioner pulley, placing it in the rail like so, and then it's just a matter of a little bit of tightening to the T-nuts, put the belt in the correct orientation like so. Make sure that you've got it correctly mounted on your pulleys. We can then loosen those back, slide it on, put it over the tensioner, bring the tensioner back. There's no need to get it to full tension at the moment. We get some tension on it, like that, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So with the belt correctly wound around the tensioner, you then need to make sure that both your lead screws are at the bottom. I took a measurement from the top of my bearing to the bottom of my cog and made sure that the cogs were both set in the same position. You then need to set these two pulleys so that the belts ride on the centre of the pulleys on all sides. When moving up and down using a lead screw, that the belts sit in the centre and don't rub too much either top or bottom that could cause drag. So once you've done that and you're happy that that is correct, we can move on to the next stage. So in the final part of today's video we will fit the Z minimum end stop. As you can see, it comes in this bag with the optical end stop, the mount and the trigger, which is this piece here. You can print a longer one. There are STL files for that on the GitHub. So let's get round to fitting this. We're going to need 4 bolts M3x10, 2 T-nuts of M3 and 2 nuts of M3. So we take 2 of the M3x10 bolts and the trigger stick and bring that in from the side like that. Try not to throw the bolts all over the place. Fit a nut, no need for a washer. So there's one. There's the second. Set that somewhere in the middle at the moment, as we're not actually setting the trigger point up yet. We'll just give those a little tighten. Like so. Then we're going to take the optical sensor, put the other 2 M3x10 bolts in, mounting plate wants to be like that, so it raises it up. You'll find that the bolts are quite a tight fit into the printed part. And then we're going to fit the T-nuts onto the back of here and slide it up onto the rail there, and then we're going to wind up so we know that we've got that in the correct place for it to trigger. So with the sensor loosely mounted in place, we'll turn this lead screw right the way up like so. That's now catching on my camera mount. We just need to move that over slightly. As we come up, we can see we need to come this way a little. And then back a touch, and make sure we've got that central like so, and then those 2 T-nuts can be tightened home like so, and that's your optical end stop there. As you can see, that blocks the light going from one side to the other, and that triggers the end stop. And that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. In the next episode we'll be dealing with the heated bed, the CoreXY belts, the extruder, and of course wiring it all together. Now if today's video has been any help to you whatsoever, please consider giving me a thumbs up and leaving a comment maybe below just to let me know how I've helped. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do that via Streamlabs or via Patreon, but please subscribe, hit the little bell button so you know next time I put a video out, and we'll see you then. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye for now.